What's going on, everybody? Mr. Octagonal here, and we are back with the 3 Minutes on the Clock podcast, episode 10 of season 2. Today, we have my NFL mock draft 7.0 for the 2020 NFL draft. This mock will be 3 rounds with trades, and this mock draft will be what I think will happen. Not what I would do, what I am predicting. If you want to see a mock draft of what I would do, I regularly do those down in my Discord. I will leave the link in the description. We're always talking football, NFL draft, sports in general over there, so that is definitely the place to be. And the circumstances are a little bit different for this mock because obviously most of the big names in NFL free agency have signed, so a lot of dominoes have fallen, a lot of picks have been traded, a few first-rounders were moved in the Stephon Diggs trade, in the DeForest Buckner trade. Other big names like Darius Slay and DeAndre Hopkins have been traded as well. And also the compensatory picks have all been released. So there are an additional 10 picks in this video in the 3rd round. Also, I wanted to get a big board video out right after the Combine, but I got sick for a few days. Then I would have done it last weekend, but MLB The Show came out, and I was just having too much fun. So I will have a big board up sometime during the week, probably Tuesday or Wednesday. Probably an NBA mock draft next weekend, and then after that, in 2 Saturdays from now, my NFL mock 8.0, as I do NFL mock drafts every 2 weeks. So without further ado, let's get the show on the road. The first pick has not changed since my first mock draft back in January, and it will not change. The Bengals are going to be selecting Joe Burrow, quarterback out of LSU. I don't think Joe Burrow has a superstar ceiling, but he is my QB1 in this class, mainly because I'm not as high on Tua Tagovailoa as others. But nonetheless, this is a slam dunk pick for the Cincinnati Bengals. This is the right pick, and this is the pick they will make. I'm not going to go into too much detail just because I find it rather obvious. With the second pick, the Redskins will select Chase Young, edge rusher, Ohio State. This pick has also not changed since my first mock. I could see the Redskins potentially moving down. I do think that is a little bit unlikely. There were rumors about them wanting Tua. That's smoke. That's not true. I think a trade down would be more likely, but I still don't think they will. And a lot of people don't think they need Chase Young. Well, that, my friends, is completely false. They have 3 good interior defensive linemen in Deron Payne, Jonathan Allen, and Matt Ioannidis. Chase Young is not an interior defensive lineman. And then you look at their edge rushers, Montez Sweat and Ryan Kerrigan, both of them are solid. But Kerrigan's not getting any younger, so I think this is your long-term Ryan Kerrigan replacement. You have Chase Young on one side, you have Montez Sweat on the other, and then those 3 interior defensive linemen as well. And that's a really, really good group going after the quarterback for the Washington Redskins. We have our first trade of the video. This is the exact same trade I had in my last mock. The Chargers will be moving up to 3. They will be giving the Lions pick 6, 37, 72, and their 2021 second-round pick. So basically, the Lions will be moving down 3 spots to acquire the Chargers' second-round pick, the Chargers' third-round pick, and a future second. And the Chargers will be selecting Tua Tagovailoa, quarterback out of Alabama. The more I think about it, I think it's starting to get a little bit less likely that the Lions move down through 3. I don't know. I just have a gut feeling that the Lions are going to mess it up. That's my life being a Lions fan. But I still do think that Detroit will move down from this pick. If not, I will be rioting. But I think this does make sense, obviously, for the Lions and then the Chargers. While I don't think I would do this, I see why they're doing it. Tua Tagovailoa, I guess, would be their guy in this scenario. They do not want to risk Miami moving up or picking him at 5. So instead, they're just going to move up, put fate in their own hands, and take Tua here. The Chargers have not really done anything at quarterback in free agency. They're currently projected to start Tyrod Taylor, who I think is honestly a little bit underrated. There are still a few guys left, Jameis Winston, Cam Newton. I could see the Chargers picking up Jameis. Probably not Cam, but maybe Jameis. I do think that could work, but I don't think that's going to happen. And I do think the Chargers will, if they don't sign someone, they will pick Tua. And even if they were to sign a guy like Cam Newton, I wouldn't be surprised if they did pick a quarterback early. With the 4th pick, the Giants select Isaiah Simmons, linebacker, safety, just a defensive playmaker in general out of Clemson. I think this is a grand slam selection for the Giants. Simmons is my number 2 player in the class behind Chase Young. He can practically play every position on the defensive side of the ball except for interior defensive line. At 6'4", 240, he is a freak of nature. I'm not surprised he blew up the combine the way he did. I saw it coming from a mile away. But man, he did put up some eye-popping numbers. And the Giants did sign Blake Martinez in free agency. First off, that's a terrible signing. Blake Martinez is not a good football player. Second off, just because they sign a linebacker does not mean they will not be selecting Isaiah Simmons. Simmons is not just a linebacker. To me, I feel like he will most likely project as an in-the-box safety most of the time, who could also play linebacker, a little bit of rushing the passer, but mostly in coverage, maybe also at times at slot cornerback every once in a while. But for the most part, he'll be a coverage linebacker or in-the-box safety. That's how I predict he will be used in the NFL. With the 5th pick, the Dolphins will not be selecting a quarterback. They're going to go with Tristan Wirfs, offensive tackle, Iowa. This is my first mock where the Dolphins do not use their first pick on a quarterback. I don't think they're sold on Justin Herbert. I think they would absolutely consider Herbert here without a doubt. But their offensive line, while it's a little bit improved, adding guys like Ted Karras, Eric Flowers, it's still not good. And they need a franchise tackle, and I believe that can be Tristan Wirfs, who could also play guard. Ted Karras is on a 1-year deal anyway, so if he were to go and Tristan Wirfs plays a lot better at guard, he could always just slide over there. I think this is a great value pick for the Dolphins. Wirfs is my number 1 offensive player, regardless of position in this draft class. And the Dolphins are getting a franchise-level offensive lineman. With the 6th pick, the Lions are going to be selecting Jeff Okudah, cornerback from Ohio State. I think if Isaiah Simmons were on the board, he would be the pick. And personally, I'm hoping we can trade down and get Isaiah Simmons, but I would certainly be happy with this scenario as well, as the Lions are getting their Darius Slay replacement in Mr. Okudah. I think the Lions are really not bad at all at the cornerback position. They just signed Desmond Trufant to a 2-year, $21 million contract. I really like that move for the short term. If Trufant can stay healthy, he's one of the best corners in the game. So while he's no Darius Slay, I think having a veteran established corner leading the charge is very good. You also got Justin Coleman in the slot, and then Amani Oruwariye, a 5th rounder last year out of Penn State, who I loved out of college. I had a 2nd-round grade on him, and he played really well towards the end of the season. He really showed a ton of flashes. So I don't think corner is that big of a need, but Desmond Trufant is not a long-term guy. Amani Oruwariye is still a question mark. So I do think the Jeff Okudah pick does make sense. Okudah certainly has more upside than any cornerback on the Lions roster, I think, by a country mile. And he is also the best player on the board, so it does make sense. With the 7th pick, the Panthers are going to be selecting Derek Brown, interior defensive lineman out of Auburn. I was really trying to find a trade here for Carolina. I don't think it makes sense for them to keep this pick, how the draft is going, but I couldn't really find a team who it made sense for them to trade up. Maybe a team who really wants one of the wide receivers. Maybe a team who wants to pass Arizona for one of the offensive tackles. But I just couldn't really figure out any reasonable trades. So the Panthers are going to keep this pick and go with Derek Brown, the run stuffer out of Auburn. I think his ceiling is a little bit limited because of his pass rush. But if he can be a guy if he can have like a Kenny Clark role in the NFL, I think this would be a really successful pick for the Carolina Panthers. Get someone in the middle of that defense in the middle of that defensive line who you can build around. The Panthers really look like they are headed towards a rebuild. They signed Teddy Bridgewater. I think that's a pretty nice pickup. But nonetheless, I don't think this team will be super competitive next season. And if Teddy Bridgewater doesn't work out, I could see them looking at quarterback next year, probably Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields. Then with the 8th pick, the Cardinals are going to select Jedrick Wills, offensive tackle out of Alabama. I've been preaching for a while they have to go offensive tackle in the first round and not receiver. Well, now there's no chance they go receiver. Their receiving core is stacked. DeAndre Hopkins is the best wide receiver in the NFL. Larry Fitzgerald is still productive. Christian Kirk has been good through 2 seasons. Andy Isabella has potential. And then watch out for Hakeem Butler. Picked in the 4th round last year. I had a late 1st round grade on him. Didn't play due to an injury, but those are 5 quality players. So obviously they're not picking receiver anytime soon in this draft. They do have glaring holes at offensive line position, so they're going to go with Wills here, who is a primary right tackle. DJ Humphries is a primary right tackle, so the fit may be a little bit awkward. However, I could see one of those 2 guys sliding over to the left side. I think Jedrick Wills could do it. He's the best pass blocker in this draft class, so I think he could move to left tackle. I think it would take a little bit, and I think he is still a little bit raw, but I do think he has one of the higher ceilings for an offensive lineman in this draft class, and this pick could work out for the Cardinals. With the 9th pick, the Jacksonville Jaguars select Javon Kinlaw, interior defensive lineman out of South Carolina. I have a very similar talent grade on Kinlaw that I do with Derek Brown. Most people have Brown as the clear number 1 interior defensive lineman in this class. I think it's these 2 guys neck and neck, and I think Kinlaw has a higher ceiling. He's not necessarily as productive against the run, but I like his pass rushing ability, and while a guy like Derek Brown, you may be a little bit hesitant at times to keep him on the field on 3rd down, that's not a question for Javon Kinlaw, and he can be a perfect Calais Campbell replacement. Have him with guys like Taven Bryan and Josh Allen going after the quarterback. I do think this would be a nice selection for the Jaguars, who are also likely headed towards a full rebuild. With the 10th pick, the Browns select Andrew Thomas, offensive tackle, Georgia. They signed Jack Conklin. That's one offensive tackle, but you still need another one. Conklin's your right tackle. Now go ahead and get your left tackle. And the Browns have a choice here between Thomas and Mekhi Becton. But Thomas has been probably the most productive offensive tackle at the collegiate level out of anybody in this class. And while he didn't test as athletically well as a guy like Becton or Jedrick Wills or Tristan Wirfs, he's still probably the safest offensive tackle in this class. And when you're looking for offensive linemen, getting a guy who can be great right away, who has a high floor, I think that would be a great pick here for Cleveland at 10. The Jets now at 11. They've put an effort to improve the offensive line in free agency. They overpaid for George Fant. They overpaid a little bit for Alex Lewis, and they overpaid for Connor McGovern. But hey, at least they're trying. I would probably pick Mekhi Becton here personally, but they do also have a glaring hole at receiver, and they had their choice between CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Judy, and Henry Ruggs. Of those 3, Jerry Judy is my wide receiver 1, so I would probably pick him, but I do have them going with CeeDee Lamb. I think he had a little bit overrated at the combine. People are saying he tested really well. He didn't test badly, and he looked good on the on-field drills, but I wouldn't say he was a gigantic winner by any means. Once again, he tested well, but I don't think he tested elite. But, I mean, his ability after the catch, he has a very, very high ceiling. Still needs to get polished a little bit, but this is a guy who's crafty with the football. If he gets open, then man, you're going to have a hard time bringing him down. With the 12th pick, the Las Vegas Raiders are going to select Henry Ruggs, wide receiver, Arizona. Al Davis is doing front flips in his grave right now because I am sure he is absolutely thrilled that the Raiders have made this pick. Henry Ruggs, obviously we know him as a speed demon, 4.27 40-yard dash. I think that was his official number. Either that or 4.28 in the ballpark. We know he's really fast. We know the Raiders have a hole at receiver. Once again, I'd pick Jerry Judy, but this is not a bad pick at all. Henry Ruggs is more than a speed guy. He's a very well-rounded receiver, and obviously, sort of like CeeDee Lamb, when he has the ball with that explosive speed, he's no fun to bring down. With the 13th pick, we have a trade. Justin Herbert has been falling, but no more. The Miami Dolphins will be moving up with San Francisco. The 49ers will be receiving pick 26, pick 39, and pick 141. So the Dolphins don't even have to give up their 18th pick here to move up and get Herbert. They didn't pick him at 5, but he's just fallen way too much, and they just cannot pass him up anymore. And without giving up the 18th pick, they still have an extra second rounder as well at pick 56. I think this makes sense for the Dolphins to go ahead and get Justin Herbert. He's my QB2. That's not me saying I'm in love with him. That's just because I think 2 is a little bit overrated. And this is a phenomenal move for San Francisco. They don't have any picks in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. So now you're getting a pick in the 2nd and the 4th, and you still have 2 first-round picks. So I think this is a phenomenal deal for San Francisco, and I think they would not hesitate to accept this. With the 14th pick, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers select Mekhi Becton, offensive tackle out of Louisville. Becton is still my number 2 offensive tackle in the class behind Tristan Wirfs. It is really close. All 4 of these top offensive tackles, you could almost put them in any order. But I do have Becton as the last one off the board. He is still the most raw, probably the least productive in college, but I think he debatably has the highest ceiling out of any of them. I mean, the way he moves with his size and his physical just appearance and intimidation factor, I mean, he has it all. And the Bucs, I really think they're just going to try to build this offense around Tom Brady, get him offensive linemen. He already has weapons at the wide receiver and tight end positions, so I think they're really going to focus on offensive line, and I do have them getting a running back later in this draft as well to complement Ronald Jones, since they missed on Todd Gurley and Melvin Gordon. They could still look at a guy like Devontae Freeman in free agency, but I do have them picking another running back later. I think they should focus more on defense because their defense is far worse, but I think they just really want to make this offense as good as they can make it for their 2-year window with Tom Brady at the helm. With the 15th pick, the Denver Broncos select Jerry Judy, wide receiver, Alabama. Wow, has the draft really, how the draft has gone, I don't think it could be any more perfect for the Broncos. In my last mock, I had them moving up to 11 to go ahead and grab Jerry Judy, but with the Raiders picking Ruggs, they're able to get Judy right here at 15. If Judy were to go at 12, Henry Ruggs would probably still be on the board here. So that would not be a bad pick either. But, I mean, getting an elite route runner alongside Courtland Sutton, if Drew Lock can play well, I think both of these receivers, Judy and Sutton, will probably get 1,000-plus yards next season. Judy's a guy who you can go deep to, but you can also depend on in the short passing game as well. While he doesn't have the athletic tools that a guy like CeeDee Lamb or Henry Ruggs has, I think he's certainly more polished as a receiver and will probably be better right away. Then with the 16th pick, the Falcons select C.J. Henderson, cornerback out of Florida. C.J. Henderson is now the second corner off the board, and I've had Henderson going low in a lot of my mock drafts. I've had him getting the Greedy Williams effect because, I mean, if you look at Greedy Williams last year, I mean, the comparison between Henderson and Greedy is certainly there. These two guys are extremely similar players, phenomenal cover corners, great athletes, but just very bad at finishing tackles. I had Greedy as a top 10 player in the class. I had him going in the top 25. He fell to the middle of the second round, and I could see C.J. Henderson. I'm not saying he's going to fall to the middle of the second round, but I could see him falling at least lower than most people expect. But the more I think about it, I do think he will go in this range. And the Falcons have a choice here. They could look at edge, a guy like Calvin Chason. I don't really love the fit because we've seen speed rushers like Vic Beasley and Takk McKinley not develop fully with the Atlanta Falcons. They could look at a guy like Christian Fulton. I still have Christian Fulton as my cornerback 2 ahead of C.J. Henderson. But Henderson is still a really, really good prospect, and I do think this is a very solid pick for the Falcons. With the 17th pick, the Dallas Cowboys select Calvin Chason, edge rusher out of LSU. This is your Robert Quinn replacement, ladies and gentlemen. Calvin Chason on one side, DeMarcus Lawrence on the other. I think that can be a really, really nice tandem. Chason reminds me a lot of Brian Burns coming out of last year's class, and if Chason plays like Brian Burns did this season, I think the Cowboys would be thrilled with this selection. Chason has phenomenal speed and quickness and explosiveness coming off the edge. He's a guy who's going to get to the quarterback. Not a great run stopper. He's not awful against the run, but he has a lot of work to do there. With the 18th pick, the Dolphins, who, of course, moved up for Justin Herbert, but still have this pick, they're going to go with Grant Delpit, safety out of LSU. The Dolphins have addressed a lot of holes in free agency. Offensive line, they've gotten a running back. They probably need another one, but Jordan Howard is a good start. They added Byron Jones, Kyle Van Noy, Shaq Lawson, and a few other players. The Dolphins have had easily the biggest offseason out of any team. I'm not saying it's the best. I'm saying they've definitely signed the most players and filled the most holes, but they still got a big hole at safety. They cut Rashad Jones, and I think they're going to need another one. And Grant Delpit, I think, will be the first safety off the board instead of Xavier McKinney. Delpit was phenomenal as a sophomore, wasn't great last year, sort of like C.J. Henderson, not the best tackler, and I think some of those effort plays could have a guy like Delpit fall a little bit. I think Delpit's effort is certainly more there than a guy like C.J. Henderson, but I do think if Delpit can really figure out his weaknesses and concerns and really address them, I think he has a chance to not only be the best safety in this class, but one of the best safeties in the NFL. With the 19th pick, the Las Vegas Raiders select Christian Fulton, cornerback out of LSU. I think Fulton's a really well-rounded cornerback. He tested a little bit better than I expected at the Combine, which is why he is still my CB2. I could see him going later, but I just think he's too talented for a team like Las Vegas to really pass up here. They still got a hole at corner. They have some young talent there. I think Trayvon Mullins had really solid rookie seasons, but I think they could use someone across from him, and I think then that can be Mr. Fulton. Pick 20, the Jaguars going to go with Jeff Gladney, cornerback out of TCU. I've been high on Gladney for a while. I've had him in the first round of every single mock draft. A lot of people had him as a second-round guy back in January. Nope. First round from day one, and I think it's pretty clear now to everybody that Jeff Gladney will be a first-rounder, as he should be a first-rounder. Gladney is extremely talented, very solid physical corner, even though he's not the biggest. And a team like Jacksonville, who has a hole at corner, Jalen Ramsey's gone, A.J. Bouye is gone. I think they absolutely have to address that early in this class. I won't be surprised if they draft 2 corners early in this class. I think Jeff Gladney is a very good start. Pick 21, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver LSU to the Eagles. They got themselves a star corner in Darius Slay. Now they need to get themselves a star receiver, and I think they have to go wide out in the first round, and I think if they don't, they'd be crazy. I do have Jefferson falling here. He could go earlier. This is probably the latest he goes. And, I mean, he had a super productive season for LSU. You can put him in the slot. You can put him in the outside. There are a bunch of different things you can do with Jefferson, and I think this makes a ton of sense for the Eagles. Obviously, their wide receiver position is kind of bad. When you have Greg Ward as your main receiver, at the end of the season, you know it's not pretty. Obviously, that's because of injuries, but there's still a lot of talent that needs to be had here. Alshon Jeffrey is as good as gone. I expect the Eagles to move him within the next few days, and I think they need a clear number one wideout, and I think that can be Justin Jefferson. With a 22nd pick, the Vikings are going to select their Stephon Diggs replacement in Denzel Mims out of Baylor. I've been high on Mims for a while. I had a second-round grade on him back in November, December, when most people had him as a 4th or 5th round guy. Then he had a great Senior Bowl. Everybody hopped on the Denzel Mims hype train. Then he had an outstanding combine, and now we are full aboard the Denzel Mims in the first round movement. I think this is a very nice selection for Minnesota. Obviously, wide receiver is now a hole all of a sudden. All they've really got there is Adam Thielen, who's not getting any younger anyway. So I do think this is a really good selection for the Vikings. With the 23rd pick, the Patriots get Jordan Love, quarterback, Utah State. So not only does Justin Herbert fall lower than expected, but so does Love. And the Patriots, now without Tom Brady, they're going to make their move. I think they will add a veteran. My guess is probably Andy Dalton. And even if they pick Love here, I don't see him starting day one. He is just super raw. I think they should go out and sign Jameis Winston. And if they do that, they will not be picking Jordan Love here. But I think they should go after Winston. But I think they will get a guy like Andy Dalton, who's more of a stopgap guy who they know isn't their franchise quarterback, whereas someone like Jameis Winston has the potential. If he can grow a little bit, he would have the upside to be this team's franchise QB. But nonetheless, Jordan Love has all the physical tools to be a star in this league. He's super raw, did not have a very good season last year for Utah State, But the upside is there. Cannon for an arm, pretty mobile, just needs to improve that accuracy and the decision-making. And then with the 24th pick, the Saints are going to select Kenneth Murray, linebacker out of Oklahoma. They have some talent on the defensive side of the ball, but I do think they need to address the linebacking core a little bit. And they had their choice between Murray and Patrick Queen. I've definitely grown on Kenneth Murray a lot. I would still pick Patrick Queen over Murray, but this is not a bad pick by any means. And I don't think the Saints are going to go wide receiver now with them signing Emmanuel Sanders. Their cornerback room looks a little bit better as well. So I do think a linebacker is probably the move here, and Kenneth Murray would be a really solid addition to the defense. Now onto the Vikings' regular selection. They're going to go with cornerback Noah Igbenogany out of Auburn. Big fan of this kid. Really talented, athletic player. I think he has an extremely high ceiling. He had a really good pro day after a very solid combine. But, I mean, his pro day, he really improved some of his numbers. And I think he has certainly moved himself into that first-round category now officially. And I think value-wise, this is a great pick. Obviously, the Vikings need cornerback pretty badly. Xavier Rhodes is gone. Trey Waynes is gone. Mackenzie Alexander is gone. Waynes and Alexander are now with the Bengals. Xavier Rhodes has not signed anywhere yet. So all they really got there is Mike Hughes, who still has been up and down so far in the league. So I think they absolutely need another player at the position. And I think Igbenogany has a chance to be a really, really good player in this league. With the 26th pick, the Niners, they got this pick from the Justin Herbert trade down. They're going to go with safety Xavier McKinney out of Alabama. The Niners roster is really well constructed. They don't have too many holes, but I do think they could use a playmaker in the back of that secondary. McKinney isn't necessarily as good, as much of a thumper as a guy like Grant Delpit, but I do think he is more sound in coverage, and I think that's where he'll be fitting in the Niners as sort of like a center field type guy, and I do think this would be a pretty solid selection for San Francisco. With the 27th pick, we got ourselves a trade. The Seahawks will be trading this pick to the Jaguars in exchange for edge rusher Yannick Ngakoue. This is the same trade I had in my last mock. I just think it makes a ton of sense. Ngakoue does not want to stay with Jacksonville. He clearly wants a new long-term contract, and he clearly wants it to be somewhere else. So I don't see the Seahawks re-signing Jadeveon Clowney. They have a gigantic hole at that edge rusher spot. So I think not only are they going to acquire Ngakoue, but I do expect them to pay him a big deal. Meanwhile, the Jaguars are going to select Curtis Weaver, edge rusher, Boise State. This is the same pick I had in my last mock. So not only is the trade the same, but the pick is the same as well, and I really like it. Curtis Weaver is super underrated. I think he's going to get picked higher than a lot of people expect, and I think he should go in the first round. He's been super productive with the Boise State Broncos. He checks all the boxes athletically, and I think this would be a phenomenal move for Jacksonville. Obviously, you don't want to give up a premier pass rusher like Yannick Ngakoue, but I just don't think they have a choice. It seems like he clearly does not want to play there, and if you can get a first-round pick for a disgruntled pass rusher who would just be gone otherwise, that's a phenomenal move. With the 28th pick, the Baltimore Ravens will be selecting Patrick Queen, and a linebacker out of Boise State. Queen is not the biggest guy. He doesn't have the most length, but he is super explosive. Not quite the athlete that a guy like Devin White or Devin Bush is, but I still do think he is a really talented player coming off a phenomenal performance in the college football playoff. And I think for Ravens, who need a guy in the middle of that defense who can replace C.J. Mosley, I think Patrick Queen can do just that. With the 29th pick, the Titans select Ross Blacklock, interior defensive lineman out of TCU. My prediction is that they will sign Jadeveon Clowney. It sounds like it's down to Seattle, the Jets, and the Titans. I have Seattle trading for Ngakoue, so that's out the window. I have the Jets making a pretty big trade later in the video, so that's out the window. And that leaves us to one. The Titans traded Jarrell Casey the other day for a reason, I think, to shed that contract so they could go out and sign a guy like Jadeveon Clowney. And now this is your Jarrell Casey replacement. Blacklock, when on the field, has been great for TCU. He had an Achilles injury a couple seasons ago, but when he is on, he can be really, really good. The Titans had their choice here between Blacklock and Gallimore. Blacklock is not the athlete that Neville Gallimore is, but I do think he is a little bit safer of a pick. With the 30th pick, the Packers select Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver, Arizona State, over a guy like Laviska Shenault, Jalen Reagor, T. Higgins. Personally, of that group, Reagor is my number one guy, but after him, I think it's Brandon Ayuk. I think he's better than a guy like Laviska Shenault or T. Higgins. I think this is a great move for the Packers. Get someone on the other side of Devontae Adams. I think this is really fair value. I've seen Ayuk go in the late second, early third a lot. I think he should be a first-round pick, and I think he will go higher than most people expect. With the 31st pick, the Niners select Cesar Ruiz, interior offensive lineman out of Michigan. I'm a big fan of Ruiz. He is far and away the best interior offensive lineman in this draft class. He's the only one who should go in the first round, and I think he's the only one that will go in round number 1. He can play center and guard. He's played mainly center with Michigan, but I do think he has the versatility and the athleticism to move over to the guard position. And then with the 32nd pick, we've got ourselves a trade. The Chiefs will be moving this pick to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Chiefs will be receiving pick 45, which is the Bucs' second-round pick this year. And they will also be receiving the Bucs' second-round pick next year, sort of similar to the Montez Sweat trade last season when the Redskins moved up to get him. They gave the Colts their second-rounder that season, and then the next season, which is obviously now. And I have the Bucs selecting DeAndre Swift, running back out of Georgia. I told you they were going to go running back. Get a guy who can be your bell cow back in the backfield, not only for right now, but also for the future. There are a few talented backs on this roster, but I don't think any of them can really carry the load. So I think having a guy like DeAndre Swift, I think makes a ton of sense for Tampa Bay. They are giving up a little bit, and as I said, I do think they should still pay attention to defense, but this is not a bad pick by any means. Get themselves a premier running back in this class, and now the Bucs offense isn't necessarily one-dimensional. Now they can feel comfortable with running it as well as obviously passing. Now on to the second round, starting with the Cincinnati Bengals. They're going to go with Zach Bond, edge rusher / linebacker out of Wisconsin. I have him listed at both positions because he can do both. You can have him rush the passer, you can have him against the run, you can have him in coverage, and his well-roundedness, I think, is what makes him such an interesting prospect. And the Bengals need both. They need guys who can rush the passer, and they need linebackers pretty badly. So this doesn't necessarily kill two birds with one stone, but it does kill one bird with two stones. You can try him out somewhere. If he doesn't play well, you can try him out the other position, I guess. And you can also have him flip-flop. I don't know. We'll see. With the 34th pick, the Colts select Laviska Shenault, wide receiver, Colorado. I think he has taken himself out of the first round, mainly because I wouldn't say he had a down year at Colorado, but he wasn't necessarily the elite dynamic playmaker that we were all hoping for. He ran a bad 40 time, mainly because he was injured. And I think his combine lowers his stock, not necessarily because of the bad result, but because of the injury. And I'm not saying this specific injury is serious, but he does have a history of medical question marks, and I think that will just make it more clear to teams that maybe you should steer clear of him early on. So that's why one of the big reasons he will fall to the second. With the 35th pick, the Lions will be getting A.J. Epinesa, edge rusher out of Iowa. I really like the fit here. I think he projects really well in a Matt Patricia defense. This is a guy you can have rushing the passer. You can have him as an interior defensive lineman. He can do a little bit of both. And I think someone with his versatility, I think Matt Patricia would have a lot of fun with that. With the 36th pick, the Giants will be selecting Matthew Peart, offensive tackle out of UConn. Peart is a gigantic specimen. He's 6'7", with absolutely huge arms, phenomenal wingspan. This is a guy who has a phenomenal ceiling and has really grown on me as a guy who could maybe slide into the late first round, early second round in that ballpark. The Giants need tackle pretty bad. There are a number of options they could go with here, but I do have the selection being Peart. With the 37th pick, this is one of the draft choices that the Lions are getting in the Chargers trade down. The Lions are going to be picking up Jonathan Taylor, running back out of Wisconsin. I'm a Lions fan. I love me some Carry On. Carry On's one of my favorite players on the roster without a doubt. But he's also made of glass bones. 18 games out of a possible 32 so far in his NFL career. Great rookie season. Last year, he was good at the end when he came back from his injury. But still, I mean, the yards per carry wasn't necessarily pretty. And while Kerryon Johnson will still be a big part of his offense, I think adding another back in Jonathan Taylor does make some sense. I'm not saying this is the pick I would make, but I wouldn't necessarily hate this selection either. Had a 1-2 punch of Taylor and Kerryon, I think could be a lot of fun. Taylor has a nice mix of power and speed. He has a workload issue, however. What I mean by that is he got so many touches at Wisconsin, his body could be beaten down a little bit early. And not to mention, he also does have a fumbling problem. So while I feel like his strengths are stronger than a lot of the running backs in this class, his weaknesses are also stronger than a lot of the backs in this year's draft. With the 38th pick, I have a trade. The Denver Broncos will be moving up here, so the Carolina Panthers will move down about 8 spots to the 46th pick. The Broncos will be getting the 38th pick. They're going to go with cornerback Trayvon Diggs out of Alabama. Physical cornerback. This is a really good value pick, which is why the Broncos will be moving up to get it. And there are some guys who they could get at 46. Maybe a guy like Damon Arnett, Cameron Dantzler, Troy Pride. Jalen Johnson, A.J. Terrell. There are options, but I think Trayvon Diggs is probably the best of that group, and the Broncos don't want to miss out on this opportunity. Carolina will be receiving, as I said, the 46th pick, along with the 113th pick and a 2021 fourth rounder. So the Panthers, for moving down 8 spots, they will be getting 2 fourths. That doesn't look like great value for Carolina, but a team starting to rebuild, you can take any picks you can get. And meanwhile, the Broncos, who really look like they're in win-now mode, get their guy here in the second round. And Denver, with Judy in the first, Diggs in the second, this is a phenomenal draft for them. And they have had a phenomenal free agency, signing Melvin Gordon for cheap. The A.J. Boye trade, the Jarrell Casey trade. Graham Glasgow, I think, is a phenomenal pickup. So, man, Denver is having a phenomenal offseason, and this draft would just continue that. With the 39th pick, the 49ers are on the clock. This is the selection they got. Another pick they got in the Justin Herbert trade down. They're going to go with Neville Gallimore, interior defensive lineman out of Oklahoma. Gallimore tested extremely well at the combine. He is a freak. A little bit older, but the motor is always going to be there with him. And he can replace DeForest Buckner in the middle of that defensive line. I'm not saying they're similar players because they're not. I mean, athletically, DeForest Buckner is quite an athlete as well, but Gallimore is definitely not the pass rusher that DeForest Buckner is. But he can still slide in there and definitely help against the run. And then at the 40th pick, the Texans, this is the selection they got in the DeAndre Hopkins trade. They're going to go with Yetur Gross-Matos, edge rusher out of Penn State. So they do get a really good value selection here. A lot of people have Gross-Matos in the first round, and I don't think that's unreasonable. On my board, he's right around that late first, maybe right at the beginning of the second round range. So I have him talent-wise about where everyone else does, but he does fall a little bit here. That's just how this draft happens to go. With the domino effect, some players happen to fall, some players happen to go early, and Gross-Matos is one of those guys who falls a little bit. The Texans could use some more pass rushing, and I think this would be obviously a really nice value selection, but it also does fit a need. With the 41st pick, the Browns will be selecting Antoine Winfield Jr., a safety out of Minnesota. In my first 5 mock drafts, I had the Browns getting Winfield with this pick. In my last one, I did not. I had been going with Xavier McKinney. Now that he is off the board, I do have it once again being Antoine Winfield. So if this does end up being the pick, I can say I called it back in January, which I guess would be pretty fun. But Winfield, this is a guy who had a great season at Minnesota. My question mark about him was his long speed, but he ran a sub 4.5 at the combine, which shocked me. And I think this is a great selection here for the Cleveland Browns. Gets a dynamic safety who can really make an impact on the secondary. With the 42nd pick, the Jaguars will be selecting Jeremy Chin, safety out of Southern Illinois. This kid is a playmaker. He's a big safety who is a ball hawk. You can almost have him as a sub linebacker at times as well. But I think this will be a super fun selection for the Jaguars, a small school kid who is super talented. And I think this will be a really, really nice selection for Jacksonville. He can do a number of things on your defense, but no matter what, he's going to be making plays. With the 43rd pick, the Bears will be selecting A.J. Terrell, cornerback out of Clemson. I'm sorry, Bears fans, but you guys had an awful offseason. I don't get the Jimmy Graham signing. I don't get the Nick Foles trade because it sounds like the Bears are still going to be paying a majority of that contract. And then they way overpaid for Robert Quinn. He had a Renaissance-type season last year with the Cowboys, but he's still like 29, 30 years old. You sign him for 5 years, $70 million. Ouch. But this is a good start to the draft, however, picking up A.J. Terrell, who had a really nice combine. I could see him going in the first round, but in a deep cornerback class, he does fall to the second, and the Bears are going to swoop him up. With the 44th pick, the Colts select Cole Kmet, tight end out of Notre Dame. Eric Ebron is gone. Congratulations, Colts fans. Brick Hands is not on your team anymore. And now you got to get themselves another weapon for Phillip Rivers. Personally, I would consider quarterback soon, maybe not yet, because I don't think there's anybody really worthy of being drafted in this range, but I think they've got to consider it. I'm not a huge fan of the Phillip Rivers signing. He was bad last year for the Chargers. I don't know why the Colts think he's going to be really good all of a sudden, randomly. Yeah, the Colts have a better offensive line, but they also have worse receivers and running backs, so I don't know. We'll see. They are certainly helping him in this draft with Shenault and Kmet. With the 45th pick, this is from the DeAndre Swift trade. Kansas City gets it. They're going with Jalen Johnson, cornerback out of Utah. Johnson has been so productive for the Utes, and I think he's going to be a really good pro in this league. I don't think he's going to be a superstar, but I think he's going to be one of those guys who really gets overlooked during draft time, and I could see a team recognize his production and pick him higher, but once again, in a deep cornerback class, he does fall to the middle of the second. With the 46th pick, the Carolina Panthers select Damon Arnett, cornerback out of Ohio State. Arnett is a very talented corner who's had some luck playing alongside guys like Jeff Okudah and Shaun Wade, but he's still a really, really good prospect in his own right, and I do think this would be a pretty good selection for Carolina. They still get a corner. Maybe he's not as good as a guy like Trayvon Diggs, but they still get a talented corner and a pair of fourth-round picks as well, so certainly nothing to complain about there. With the 47th pick, the Falcons select J.K. Dobbins, running back, Ohio State. They did just sign Todd Gurley the other day. However, Gurley is still a massive question mark with his knees. I'm not certain he can be a starting running back long-term in the NFL. And not to mention, he was also signed on a one-year contract. And the Falcons could use someone else anyway. Ito Smith, Brian Hill, they're both meh. So if they're going to pick up JK all day from Ohio State, Dobbins is a very talented player. He's the third running back off the board here, but I think of this top three of Swift, Taylor, and Dobbins, you can almost put them in any order. Dobbins is my number 3 ranked running back, but not by a large margin. And I do think this is a great pick for Atlanta. With the 48th pick, we got a trade. The Ravens will be moving up here to get this pick from the Jets, who will be receiving edge rusher Matthew Judon. I do have the Jets missing out on Jadeveon Clowney, and this is the next best thing. I do think they will pay Judon the big bucks, and with Baltimore's cap situation and Lamar Jackson going to be needing a few new contract within the next couple years, I don't think Judon is in their long-term plans, and the Ravens will be selecting Terrell Lewis, edge rusher out of Alabama, so this is your Judon replacement. Terrell Lewis is a really good player. This is a first-round talent, but the medical concerns are there. And if he can stay healthy, he will be a great, great player in this league. But that's just a question mark with him. I think there's a good chance he will be great in the NFL, but he just has to stay healthy, which is not a guarantee. With the 49th pick, the Steelers will be selecting Lucas Niang, offensive tackle from TCU. I'm not going to lie, I thought about Trent Williams maybe being traded for this selection, but the Steelers don't have any more picks until their compensatory selection in the 3rd round. So I don't think they really want to give up any more draft choices for an older player in Williams, who's obviously great, one of the best tackles in the NFL, but I don't really know if they'd want to do that. So I have them going young here, picking up Niang, a very talented tackle from TCU, who I think could go higher And this is probably the latest he goes. Great value, and it does sort of fit a need. Not the biggest need for Pittsburgh, but it is one of their bigger ones. So I do think this will be a really good move for them. With the 50th pick, the Bears select Jonah Jackson, interior offensive lineman from Ohio State. Their interior line could use some work. Jackson is a guy whose stock has really risen this past month and a half or so. So I do think this will be a nice selection for them. The Cowboys get Kyle Duggar, safety out of Lennar Ryan. Duggar is another one of those small school players who is just a phenomenal football player. Tested really well at the combine, superhuman athlete, and has just been a star for Lennar Ryan. I understand he's played Division II competition, but I think this is a guy who will make a legit impact in the National Football League. With the 52nd pick, the Rams get Josh Uche, edge rusher out of Michigan. Uche is a slim, explosive player coming off the edge. The Rams' defense got worse this offseason, losing guys like Michael Brockers and Corey Littleton and Dante Fowler as well. So while Aaron Donald theoretically could really do it all on his own, I think it's better that he doesn't do it all on his own and you get him some help. I think that can be Uche. With the 53rd pick, the Eagles select Troy Pride, cornerback Notre Dame. They added Darius Slay, who is an all-pro caliber cornerback. That's great, but that does not fix their cornerback problem. They still have a hole at that position. Sidney Jones has not worked out. Rasul Douglas is not that special. Avonte Maddox is meh. So they're going to pick up Pride here out of Notre Dame, who I think is really underrated. Had a good Senior Bowl, and I think that's really where he's made his money, coming off a very solid season at Notre Dame, and I do think this will be a pretty good selection for the Eagles. With the 54th pick, the Buffalo Bills select Julian Okwara, edge rusher Notre Dame. In my last two mocks, I've had them trading this selection for Matthew Judon, but now that they've made the Stephon Diggs trade, I don't see them trading out of their second-round choice after giving a bunch of picks up to Minnesota. They are going to pick an edge rusher here in Okwara, who's raw and I think has a ton of upside. For production wasn't always there at Notre Dame, but the talent was, and if he can just put the pieces together, I think he'll be a great pro in this league. With the 55th pick, the Baltimore Ravens select Jalen Reagor, wide receiver TCU. This is an absolute steal. Reagor is a top 20 player in this class, in my opinion. Yeah, he wasn't outstanding at the combine, but he didn't test badly either. And I mean, he's faster in game. He ran in the low 4.4s, had a bad 3-cone time, but the agility and the speed and the athleticism is on display in game. So I think he's still a really, really good prospect, and he will be slept on. And he's going to fall way farther than he should, and this would be an absolute steal for Baltimore. And then with the 56th pick, the Dolphins select Lloyd Cushenberry, interior offensive lineman out of LSU. They've improved their offensive line a lot, but not enough. So I think adding a guy like Cushenberry here could make a ton of sense. The interior linemen are starting to go a little bit. This is right around the area where I think a lot of them are going to start to get selected, not including Cesar Ruiz, but then next tier of guys, I think right around this mid to late part of the second round is where they're all going to start to fall. With the 57th pick, the Houston Texans select KJ Hamler, wide receiver, Penn State. Hamler is tiny, but he's a dynamic playmaker. You can put him in the slot, and that's where he will be a lot. But I also like him as a gadget-type player, a guy who can really do multiple things. You can have him come around for jet sweeps and end-arounds every once in a while. You can have him in the backfield. So KJ Hamler can do a lot of different things with his athleticism and explosiveness. And I think he can add a new level to this Texans offense, not necessarily replacing the production of a guy like DeAndre Hopkins, but he can help fill the void a little bit. With the 58th pick, the Vikings select Josh Jones, offensive tackle out of Houston. Jones is a Pro Football Focus darling. He tested really well according to them, and there's a chance he goes in the top 20. There's also a chance he falls to the 3rd or 4th round. He tested pretty well at the combine, and I do have him going right around here to the Vikings. I think he's really raw, but he does have a lot of upside. But I don't think the Vikings really need to start him right away. I think he's just super raw and just has a lot of work to do. Performed well at the Senior Bowl as well, but I think he's probably not going to be NFL ready for another year or two. With the 59th pick, the Seahawks select Michael Pittman, wide receiver USC. He had a really good combine, and this is a player who I really like. Big frame guy who ran a nice 40 time, and I think has a lot of upside. Very productive at USC as well, and I'm surprised that he wasn't really on our radar back in like January and February. He had a good Senior Bowl as well. So I'm surprised we really didn't have our eye out on him until now, but I'm happy that he did have a good combine and we are able to notice his talent. With the 60th pick, the Ravens select Robert Hunt, interior offensive lineman out of Louisiana. The Ravens may be the best tackle duo in the league with Ronnie Stanley and Orlando Brown. I think he could make a case for New Orleans with Teron Armstead and Ryan Ramczyk, but outside of that, I mean, the Ravens' tackles are phenomenal, but they could use some help in the interior of the offensive line. Marshall Yanda did announce his retirement, and this is your Marshall Yanda replacement, Ravens fans. Robert Hunt, talented player from the Raging Cajuns. With the 61st pick, the Titans select Adam Trautman, tight end out of St. John's. Delaney Walker is gone. They like to run 2 tight end sets. Jonnu Smith is a solid player. I personally like his upside more than others, but I could see them going tight end early, and I think Trautman has asserted himself as the potential second tight end off the board out of Dayton. With the 62nd pick, the Packers select Raekwon Davis, interior defensive lineman out of Alabama. I think they could use a little bit of help there. Have a guy next to Kenny Clark. I think they could be a pretty nice duo. Davis' stock has sort of dipped a little bit this season. Probably would have been a first or a high second last year had he declared because he was eligible. But still, I do think this is a nice selection for Green Bay. With the 63rd pick, the Chiefs select Malik Harrison, linebacker out of Ohio State. Their linebacking core could certainly use some work, and I do like Harrison a lot. Very talented player, and I think he can slide right in and become an immediate impact for this Kansas City defense. Then with the 64th pick, I do have the Redskins moving up. Trent Williams is on his way to Seattle. The Seahawks Super Bowl window is starting to close just a little bit. Russell Wilson still has some great years left, but he's also like 31 by now. And as he gets older, he's going to start to get less mobile. So the Seahawks have to worry about offensive line, and they're going to get him a superstar. And Trent Williams will still be really good for a few more seasons. The Redskins are going to select Ezra Cleveland, offensive tackle out of Boise State. I'm worried Cleveland will be overdrafted. A lot of people are starting to talk about him as a potential late first, early second round guy. I don't see it. He tested well at the combine, but I'm still not particularly high on him. But this can be your Trent Williams replacement. He is still a little bit raw, but does have some potential. With the 65th pick, the Bengals are going to select Willie Gay, linebacker out of Mississippi State. I think Willie Gay will be a third-round steal. This is a guy who has late first, early second talent. You can have him at linebacker. You can have him rushing the passer. Sort of like Zach Bond in a way. Once again, killing one bird with 2 stones. The Bengals are going double trouble with that. Willie Gay had a bunch of suspensions in college, but a lot of those reasons are unclear. I think most of them are mainly academic. So Willie Gay, the person, might not be as bad as someone may expect. And I think this could be a really good selection for the Bengals. The 66th pick, the Redskins select Bryson Hopkins, tight end Purdue. Jordan Reed is gone. He just needs to retire. The concussions are just too much. For his sake, I really hope he calls it quits. It sounds like he wants to keep playing, but he just can't keep going. But the Redskins did let him go regardless, and they do need a replacement. So I think that can be Mr. Hopkins out of Purdue. With the 67th pick, the Lions select Donovan Peoples-Jones, wide receiver out of Michigan. He had a really good combine. He'd be a mid-second round pick in most draft classes. But since this one is so deep at the receiver position, he falls here to the 3rd round, where the Lions are going to snatch him up. I think Detroit's receiving core is really, really solid. Obviously, Kenny Golladay is great. I expect him to get a gigantic contract within the near future. On the other side of him, you got Marvin Jones, who I think is really good as well. Jones is also in the last year of his deal, and I'm a little bit more hesitant if the Lions are going to re-sign him. He's nearing 30, and I don't think it's certain that the Lions are going to bring him back. Also got Danny Amendola in the slot, who's kind of older. So the Lions could look at a slot guy as well, but Donovan Peoples-Jones is likely the Marvin Jones replacement. Jones is a big physical receiver. He was jumping out of the gym at the combine. He can absolutely leap. And I think this will be a really solid selection for the Lions. I'd be happy with it at least. With the 68th pick, the Jets select Austin Jackson, offensive tackle out of USC. The Jets have not addressed offensive line yet in this draft. They picked a wide receiver, CeeDee Lamb, in the first round. They acquired Matthew Judon with their second-round pick. So now in the third, they will add an offensive lineman. Jackson's a little bit raw, and I feel like his stock has dipped just a little bit. But I do think he is a really solid player. With the 69th pick, nice, the Carolina Panthers will be selecting Akeem Davis-Gaither, linebacker, out of Appalachian State. This is a pretty nice pick, no pun intended, as Panthers do need a Luke Kuechly replacement. Akeem Davis-Gaither is an extremely underrated prospect, doesn't really get talked about enough, but I think this is extremely good value for him. Most people have him as a 4th, 5th rounder. I have him as a late 2nd round guy. So I think this will be a really solid selection for Carolina, getting a good value pick and a player I like. That's bonus points. With the 70th pick, the Dolphins select Clyde Edwards-Helaire, running back out of LSU. Jordan Howard's not going to be enough, and he has injury problems anyway. So they're definitely going to need more of a primary back. I don't think Jordan Howard can really be a primary back. I think he's more of a power back. He's a guy who can get 40% of the touches, and then you give the rest to your main guy, which I think the Dolphins can make a choice here, Clyde or Cam Akers. I'd personally pick Cam Akers, but, I mean, you could go with either one. Neither of them would be a bad pick here. Clyde had a really good season at LSU, super well-rounded player, and I think this would be a pretty good pick for the Dolphins. Pick 71, Logan Sternberg, interior offensive lineman out of Kentucky to the Lions. They have a hole at guard. This is your starting right guard, ladies and gentlemen, the Graham Glasgow replacement. I think we have handled our offensive line situation terribly this offseason. I was cool with cutting Rick Wagner. I was happy with that move, but I did not approve of letting Glasgow go, especially if he's only making $11 million a season. I did not like the Vaitai signing. Other than that, I think we've done fine this offseason, just how we've managed the offensive line. This is a little bit of a reach. There are a few guys I like more than Sternberg, Natane Muti, Nick Harris, but not a bad pick. And then with the 72nd selection, the Cardinals select Marlon Davidson, interior defensive lineman out of Auburn. He's been playing with Derek Brown and Nick Coe in that Tigers D-line. Definitely a scary group, but he has really held his own with them. And this is a really solid selection for the Cardinals, a team that really needs interior defensive linemen badly. Could have looked at a guy like Javon Kinlaw at 8. If Derek Brown's on the board at 8, he's also a possibility as well. So this is a pretty nice selection for them. The 73rd pick, the Jaguars will be selecting T. Higgins, wide receiver from Clemson. T. Higgins is one of the biggest draft fallers these past few months. A guy who looked like he was a dead-set first-rounder back at the beginning of February. And now, I mean, didn't test at the Combine, wanted to wait till his pro day, and he didn't look very good at his pro day, so I do think he falls. This is probably the latest he goes, maybe a bit of an overreaction. But once again, it's a very deep receiver class, so guys who are second-round talents are going to fall to the third round. I think T. Higgins is certainly one of them. The Jaguars have some talented receiver. They have DJ Chark, who I absolutely love. DJ Chark is one of the funnest players in this league, just the way he plays. So explosive, so dynamic. There's also some other talented players there. Keelan Cole's probably going to be back. D.D. Westbrook's solid in the slot. Marquise Lee, when healthy, isn't awful. But outside of DJ Chark, I don't know if any of those guys are legitimate building blocks for this team long term. So maybe getting a guy like T. Higgins, who has a pretty high ceiling at this point for the third round, I think could make a ton of sense for Jacksonville. Browns get Matt Hennessy, interior offensive lineman out of Temple. They've improved the O-line a little bit, but it needs more work. Hennessy is a primary center, and they have J.C. Treader there. Treader is versatile enough to move to guard, so I think they could always do that. With the 75th pick, the Colts select Jalen Hertz, quarterback, out of Oklahoma. Jalen Hertz is a very interesting prospect. They could look at Jacob Eason, whose stock is a giant question mark to me. He could go in the second round. He could go in the fourth round. There's also Jake Fromm as well. But I have them going with Hertz. I think he has the highest ceiling of the group. He tested really well at the Combine. I think he had a very overrated season at Oklahoma. He was a Heisman finalist, but I don't think he was really deserving of that. Just super inefficient at times. The decision-making was questionable. But I like this pick for the Colts because Phillip Rivers is not their long-term guy, and clearly they don't believe Jacoby Brissett is either. Bucks go Devon Hamilton, interior defensive lineman out of Ohio State. Finally addressing the defense, Hamilton had a quiet but good combine in my opinion, and I like this pick for Tampa Bay. Broncos get Sadiq Charles, offensive tackle out of LSU. Garrett Bowles ain't it, Chief. He's just not good. He's either allowing a sack or getting called for a holding penalty. It's one of the two. Broncos need a replacement. Charles had a nice season with the Tigers, and I do think this will be a good pick. With the 78th pick, the Falcons select Netane Muti, interior offensive lineman out of Fresno State. Big fan of this kid. He is a borderline first-round talent, but the questions are the medical. He's another one of those players who's a phenomenal player. Talent-wise, he's the second-best interior offensive lineman in this class, and he's not that far behind Cesar Ruiz. But it's just a matter of can he stay on the field. He was excellent at the bench press. He benched like 43, 44 reps or something incredible like that. And I really like this pick for the Falcons, who really went hard on the offensive linemen last year, picking 2 in the first round, but it's certainly not done yet. And I think adding a guy like Muti could be a great selection. I would definitely pick him over Logan Sternberg, and if the Lions got him with that pick, I would be jumping up and down for joy. With the 79th pick, the Jets select Cam Chancellor, corner Mississippi State. I think his stock sort of dipped a little bit because of a bad combine performance, pretty poor 40 time. I think he was right up there, right in that tier with guys like A.J. Terrell, Jalen Johnson, Damon Arnett, but I think the bad combine has sort of pushed him below a little bit, and that's why he falls here to the third. The Jets are going to swoop him up. And then the Raiders go Justin Madubuike, interior defensive lineman out of Texas A&M. Their interior defensive line isn't bad. Mo Hurst, P.J. Hall. There's some talent, but I think they could use a little bit more work. Their linebacking core obviously looks a lot better with the additions of Kwiatkowski and Corey Littleton. Their edge rushers, Cleveland Farrell, Max Crosby, talented young players. But I think they could use one more piece in the middle of this D-line, and I think Madubuike can be that. With the 81st pick, the Raiders select Ashton Davis, safety from California. I'm not as high on Davis as others. A lot of people have him as an early to mid-second round guy. He's starting to grow on me a little bit as a prospect. However, I'm still not sold on him. But I do think this is not a bad pick for Las Vegas. I don't know how many times I've called them Oakland today. Probably a few. But the Raiders, I think, could still use help at that safety position. I think Davis would be a solid pick here. Cowboys go Bryce Hall, cornerback from Virginia. I'm going to guarantee you right now, once we hit draft time, Bryce Hall will be in my top 32 players. And he is now on my... I have him graded as a first-round prospect now, and I think I will when we hit the draft. And I think he'll fall because of the medical. But I don't think his injury concerns are as big as people think. I mean, he suffered an injury last year, missed some games, but I don't think it's really an injury that's going to derail his NFL career. So I think this is an absolutely phenomenal selection for the Dallas Cowboys, who could use some help at corner. Jordan Lewis is on the last year of his deal. Chidobe Awuzie, the funnest name in the NFL, is on the last year of his deal too. So I think they could maybe use a replacement if they don't want to bring both back, or one back, because the Cowboys are paying a lot of money to a certain few players. The 83rd pick, the Broncos get Jordan Brooks, linebacker, Texas Tech. Very athletic, tested well at the combine. He had like a 4.44 40-yard dash. Really good time for him, and the Broncos, I think, could use some help in the middle of their defense. I think Brooks will be a nice pick. Rams get Damian Lewis, interior offensive lineman out of LSU. They could look to go front seven here. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what they did, but they also could use some help on the line, and I think Lewis would be a solid selection. The Lions, they got this pick in the Darius Slade deal. They're going to go with Jordan Elliott, interior defensive lineman out of Missouri. The Lions have improved their interior defensive line this offseason, adding Nick Williams and Danny Shelton. However, I think they could use another one. Shelton is not a guy you really want on the field on third downs, and both of those guys were only signed to 2-year contracts anyway. So I think adding a guy you can try to build around for the future is probably a smarter idea. Elliott is another one of those guys who is a massive pro football focused player. Those guys over there love him. I think they have him as a first round prospect. I'm not saying I do, but I do think he is a very talented player, and I would not be mad at this pick at all for Detroit. Bills get Cam Akers, running back, Florida State. They missed out on Melvin Gordon. I think Devontae Freeman makes a ton of sense for them, but I do have them going with Cam Akers here instead. Devin Singletary is a very solid player, but he's not a bell cow running back. He's not a guy who you can get 20 touches a game to. This is a guy, or Singletary is a guy who can make plays few big plays every once in a while, but is not a guy you're going to give the ball to 20 times. I think Cam Akers can be that guy, and I think having a duo of Akers and Singletary could be really good for the Bills. Patriots get Bradley Anae, edge rusher from Utah. Anae doesn't have the length you'd love, but he did have a really good Senior Bowl. And in an underrated edge class, the Patriots are going to get a steal, in my opinion. Second-round prospect for sure. Very solid value by New England. And then the Saints go with Chase Claypool, wide receiver, Notre Dame. He tested outstanding at the combine. Big frame, very athletic. There were reports that he can move to tight end as well. But for now, I have him as a wide receiver. The Saints did sign Emmanuel Sanders. Very good pickup, first of all. But he's getting older, only a 2-year deal anyway, and I think they could use another guy anyway. So I think Chase Claypool could be a really, really solid selection for them. With the 89th pick, the Vikings go with Jason Strowbridge, interior defensive lineman out of North Carolina. The Vikings let Linval Joseph go. Everson Griffin, even though he's more of an edge, is gone as well. And this Vikings team on both sides of the ball is going to look a lot different this upcoming season, especially defensively, and especially if they trade away a guy like Anthony Harris, too. So I think if they can try to build a new foundation on their defensive line, I think that could make sense, and Strowbridge could be a pretty solid selection. With the 90th pick, the Texans go Isaiah Wilson, offensive tackle out of Georgia. They could use some help on the offensive line for sure, and I don't know how certain they are with keeping Laramie Tunsil. Apparently, he wants a whole lot of money, looking at like $18 to $20 million a year. I don't know how much he really wants to do that, so I think this could be a pretty good pick for Houston. Las Vegas at 91, they're going to go with Jabari Zuniga, edge rusher from Florida. Get themselves another pass rusher. Zuniga would be rotational for the time being, but who knows? Maybe Cleveland Ferrell or Max Crosby doesn't pan out. Maybe Crosby was a one-year wonder. Maybe Cleveland Ferrell really turns into a bust. And I think Zuniga could be good down the line. The Ravens go with Anthony McFarland, running back from Maryland. I really like McFarland a lot. I think he's one of the more underrated players in this draft class. Baltimore could use another running back with Mark Ingram. I do like Justice Hill. They also have Gus Edwards. So there's some talent there, but I could see them going with a running back here. Right around round 3, maybe round 4. Titans go Darrell Taylor, edge rusher out of Tennessee. I do have them getting Jadeveon Clowney. However, he's probably going to sign to a short-term deal. They did sign Vic Beasley, but he's only on a 1-year contract as well. And I still think the only edge rusher on their team they're really going to build around long-term is going to be Harold Landry. So I think Darrell Taylor could be a really solid selection here. The value is certainly there at 93. Packers go Michael Ojemudia, cornerback out of Iowa. I think they could use a little bit more help in the secondary. They have done a good job in recent years not playing safeties at corner. Jair Alexander looks like a star, but I think they could use probably another guy. Josh Jackson also has a little bit of developing to do. Kevin King, player. The Broncos go Rashard Lawrence, interior defensive lineman out of LSU. They did acquire Jarrell Casey, but he's not a spring chicken, and I think the Broncos could like to get some youth here, a guy in Lawrence who can develop and eventually be the starter there. And then at pick 96, Chiefs go Darrington Evans, running back, Appalachian State, another running back who I think is really underrated. Most people have guys like Zach Moss or Eno Benjamin better than McFarland and Evans. I personally disagree, and I think these two guys will go first. I think it's obviously not for certain, but I think these two, McFarland and Evans, will go higher than most expect, and I think this will be a really, really good pick by Kansas City. Now on to the compensatory selections. I cannot fit 10 picks into one screen, so we're going to have 5 on this one and then 5 on the next one. Starting with Cleveland at 97, they go Troy Dye, linebacker out of Oregon. As a Duck fan, Dye is one of my favorite players on that team. Heart and soul of the defense. And he can be the prime Joe Scobert / Christian Kirksey replacement. Both of those guys are gone. Kirksey now with Green Bay. Scobert landing a big contract with Jacksonville. And I think Dye and Mac Wilson could be a pretty good duo. Patriots go Albert Okwunibium. here at 98, they need a new tight end. Gronk obviously is gone, and they have options. They could look at Thaddeus Lewis, Hunter Bryant, maybe Harrison Bryant, a big sleeper of mine. But I do have it being Okonibium, who had a really good combine, ran a blazing 40-yard dash time. The questions with him are medical. Can he stay healthy? If he can, he might be tight end 1 for most people in this class. Giants at pick 99 go Alex Highsmith, edge rusher from Charlotte. They could use some pass rushing help for sure. They were linked to Jadeveon Clowney. I don't think they will get him, so this is the next best thing, I suppose, kind of. Highsmith is a really underrated player, in my opinion, and I think he's going to get picked higher than most expect. Patriots go Terrell Burgess, safety from Utah. Deron Harmon is gone, and the Patriots love to have multiple talented safeties. Devin McCourty is back, but he's not getting any younger. Neither is Patrick Chung. So I think having a guy like Burgess who could develop in this Bill Belichick system, I think he can be another one of those guys who Bill Belichick really loves. And then at pick 101, Amik Robertson, cornerback, Louisiana Tech to Seattle. I really like Robertson. I think he's an underrated player. Once again, this is a deep cornerback class, so guys like him sort of get screwed a little bit. But I do think this is a nice pick for Seattle. Shaq Griffin is on the last year of his deal. I do expect the Seahawks to retain him, but they could use some more help at corner. They're not great there. They have a few young pieces, guys like Trey Flowers, but it's not the best. So I think they could use another young player in Robertson who could eventually become a talented starter for the squad. Now at 102, the Steelers are going to go with John Grenard, edge rusher from Florida. They gave Bud Dupree the franchise tag, but he was sort of a one-year wonder, sort of a disappointment out of Kentucky, a first-rounder a few years ago, but during his contract year, he magically looked really good. So I don't know how sure the Seahawks are on building around him. Obviously, you got TJ Watt as the other edge rusher, who's an obvious building block. He's going to get a gigantic payday, most likely within the next couple of months by the Steelers. But I do think they could probably use another one, and that can be Grenard. Pick 103, the Eagles go Kayvon Wallace, safety out of Clemson. Wallace is a pretty solid player, and the Eagles losing Malcolm Jenkins could use help at safety. They did bring back Rodney McLeod, but he's not going to be enough. Rams at 104 go Zach Moss, running back out of Utah. Todd Gurley is gone. Who's their projected starter? Darrell Henderson, who did not play particularly well last year. I did not like the pick at the time. I thought he was a guy who should have gone in the 4th or 5th. Rams clearly reached. I got that one right, not trying to toot my own horn or anything. But I think the Rams could use another one. I think they make the most sense for a guy like Devontae Freeman. But nonetheless, they should probably look to go running back pretty early in this draft class. And Zach Moss is a pretty darn good one. Not as good as Anthony McFarland or Darrington Evans, though. I'd say this is about fair value for Moss, especially with those two guys going in front of him. This is not what I would consider a reach. Vikings go Nick Harris, interior offensive lineman out of Washington. I really like Harris. This is a good value selection for the Vikings, continuing to improve on the offensive line. And then the final pick of the day, Ravens going Laurel Murchison, interior defensive lineman out of NC State. The interior defensive line really improved for Baltimore, adding Michael Brockers and Calais Campbell. Both of them, however, are over the age of 30, or Brockers is awfully close. But Campbell's like 34 by now. Brockers probably right around that 30 range. So I think it's good to start to get some youth there at the position. That'll end the episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure to hit the like button and subscribe if you are new. And as always, have a good one. Peace out, everybody.